Again, my name is Alan Nachumson of Nachumson PC. I'm an attorney in the Philadelphia region. My practice is focused primarily on real estate, transactional, and litigation matters. April 1st is coming next Wednesday, right? And you can see it already that we're definitely having an economic downturn where you saw yesterday, there were like over 3 million unemployment claims made in the United States. So what I see what's going to happen is there's going to be a lot of defaults on your mortgages, on your rental payments, on any type of credit. But what I've been focusing on is really about the landlord-tenant relationship, like what's going to happen there, right? So right now in Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court issued an order stating that no evictions can take place through April 3rd. I anticipate that that order is going to be extended for some time, meaning that even if you have a tenant in default, if you're a landlord, you're not going to be able to evict them from the property. So that's the first thing in the background. The second thing in the background is, as a landlord or as a property owner, right? Whether it's your primary residence, a second home, or an investment property, you may not have the financial wherewithal to, pay your debts and obligations to your mortgage lender. If it's your primary residence or your second home and you lost your job or you have a significant loss of income, you may not have the ability to pay that mortgage. And if it's an investment property and you're relying on someone else to pay essentially your mortgage through rental payments and they lost their job or they have a significant loss of income, you're facing a situation where what do? So the government recently, through Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, the big mortgage buyers in the market have stated that so long as you don't evict someone in the landlord-tenant relationship, you as the borrower will not have to pay any penalties, interest, and it won't affect your credit rating if you enter into a forbearance program.
If the person, say, loses their job and then doesn't pay, are they going to be responsible for that payment in the future?
Well, so, any lease is just like any other contract. You enter into a contract and you agree to do X and someone agrees to do Y, right? So if you're the landlord, you agree to provide possession to a certain place, whether it's a house or apartment, and you as the tenant are required or obligated to pay rent. So that's not going to change. But from a practical standpoint, you can't get blood from a stone either, right? So as a landlord, you have to make practical business decisions. Are you going to have someone where you can evict them from the property, and you may not want to evict them if you want to avail yourself of forbearance options? What do, right? So there are going to be a lot of people who come April 1st are not going to get rent payments from their tenants, right? So you have to think proactive, and that's what we've been doing with our landlord clients. We've been working with a half a dozen or so landlord clients throughout the city of Philadelphia, where we've come up with a payment plan addendum where, again, we know practically that these people may not pay. So what do? Right? So first things first is to verify that the person that you're dealing with, the tenant, actually has a significant loss of income or loss of employment. Again, there are people who may not lose their jobs in this current environment. If you're a doctor, if you work for the government, you're not going to actually have a loss of income or loss of employment probably, right? Police officers, firefighters, there are a lot of different industries which are not going to be affected. And some of them actually, if you work for something like Amazon or Zoom, right? They're actually increasing their market share. So you need to verify that the person actually has a significant loss of income or employment. Income, how do you do that? You can have them talk to their employer, get a letter from their employer saying that say they're a restaurant worker, they're losing shifts, or they're being furloughed for whatever reason. Get a letter verifying that there's a loss of income. In terms of loss of employment, get proof that your tenant actually filed for unemployment compensation and was actually granted unemployment compensation, right? So that's the first thing. Verify that they actually have some type of situation which calls for potentially rent relief. Then secondly, what do, right? So you have rent going backwards, which is in arrears. So let's just say April's in arrears, and then rent going forward starting in May. So there's a couple of different avenues in terms of rent going backwards, right? Most tenants pay last month's rent and security deposit, right? So it really depends on how you're going to apply that, right? So if you're in the first month of a year lease, as opposed to month 10 in a year lease, it may be different. But at the very least, I have a lot of my landlord clients saying, okay, I'm going to either apply all of last month's rent to pay for April's rent, and then we'll figure out what's going to go on in May, or we're going to take a portion of last month's rent and apply it to like April's rent, and then in the portion with the tenant would be responsible for either now or sometime in the future that's agreed upon by the parties.
A lot of people have been reaching out to me about their landlords or their tenant situation, and they said, oh wow, there are tenants that have been deadbeats before this, and they're definitely going to try to take advantage of the situation now because they don't want to be evicted and they don't want to have that on their record. But how long do you foresee this non-eviction situation occurring for? Like, that's up in the air though, right?
Yeah, it's up in the air, but I definitely see, especially with cities like, in Philadelphia, you're talking about at least another month, if not more. The city shut down essentially all their non-essential services. Philadelphia tends to be protective of their tenants in general. And in these times, you have to be compassionate about it. So you have to figure out. That's why the government has provided, hopefully, some real mortgage forbearance options for landlords, right? Because landlords have to pay their mortgage no matter what. So if their tenants aren't paying and ultimately the borrower is foreclosed from evicting their tenants, there has to be some type of balance to help the borrowers out.
Would choosing to not renew their lease and then maybe switching over to a Section 8 or government assisted program some way of hedging their bet? Do you think that that's a way to go, or do you not recommend that? How do you feel about being a more, I guess, protected cash flow wise, protected landlord?
Well, Section 8 has some limitations. I'm not like an expert by any means with Section 8, but I would assume that my brief understanding of Section 8 is the government only covers a decent portion of the rent, but they're only going to cover up to a certain amount. So it depends on what areas that your properties are in, right? So if you have a property in Rittenhouse Square as opposed to an area which allows for lower rents, you're not going to be able to do Section 8 in Rittenhouse Square, right? So maybe you change your investment model, right? Maybe you do change your investment model and buy in those areas where Section 8 is affordable from a business perspective.
Right. So I actually am a Section 8 landlord, and some of my tenants are 100%, and then some of my tenants are about 50% subsidized. So it really depends. It's tenant by tenant, because that was one of the questions that I've gotten, which was, should people be looking into government assisted? But it does depend on the numbers. As you were saying, if you have a property in Rittenhouse Square, even though Section 8 does give you a rent bonus for being in a nicer zip code, it usually isn't enough for the Class A areas or even Class B areas. It's just way under the market value. But
exactly.
As a hedge, people are looking at that.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to cover your mortgage and other expenses. Like, that's the point. You're trying to make money on the deal, and that's probably not going to happen in areas that are more affluent.
Right. Now, in terms of the cash flow, now I actually work at a bank, and the memo was sent out, and a lot of times the banks, they want to collect the notes, and they want to make sure that the borrower isn't trying to just get a forbearance just because, just like how a tenant may want to get rent relief just because. They may still have a job, but they just don't want to pay rent, and they look at this as an opportunity. So as an excuse, or not even an excuse, of like, hey, can you provide me proof? And then if the tenant says, what, my word isn't good enough, you can actually just put it on the bank and say, hey, I'm trying to get some relief too because I have a mortgage, and the bank is requiring it, which they probably will. They probably will want to see some kind of proof so that they're not just issuing a forbearance just for no reason.
Yeah, and I think most of my clients don't want to deal with the paperwork and the frustration of having to fill out paperwork just to get some type of forbearance, right? Because if you think about it, the money's still owed, right? So say your mortgage is $1,000 a month, right? And say your rent that you can collect is $1,200 a month. So, and let's just say all in, actually rent, mortgage and everything else is $1,200. You're making $200, right? No one wants to go through the frustration of having to like fill out paperwork with the bank just for the sake of filling it out, right? So yeah, there should, just like the tenant, there should be verification, but that money's still owed, right? So whether there's no interest, no penalties, ultimately you owe it. And that's why I've actually been telling clients and recommending to clients, they should apply to these programs regardless, hoping that the rent is paid. And if it's not, then you have the ability to get forbearance. And if you do collect the rent and you do eventually collect the rent and you are in forbearance, well, eventually hold that money, stay liquid, and at the end of this crisis, then pay the bank back, and then you're in no worse of a situation. But again, you don't want, I think most borrowers and investors don't want to just like go deeper in the hole. So.
Right. So ultimately what you got to do is protect your cash flow, right? Cash flow is king in this situation, right? So if you can get the bank to delay your payment, then you're holding on to a little bit more in the event that the tenant doesn't pay. Not saying that they won't, but they might not. We have a question. What do you do if the tenant won't pay and won't communicate? So if that happens, then what?
Well, unfortunately, self-help is not allowed in Pennsylvania, so you can't just change the locks on them. You can't shut off the utilities on them. So you're in a bad, to be honest, you're in a bad situation, right? But just because you can't evict someone doesn't mean they don't owe the money. And eventually you will be able to sue them. What you can collect is another thing. But that's why you have last month's rent and security deposit. So you can take security deposit. Most leases allow you to take security deposit and apply it to any arrearage that's owed, right? So most times most landlords collect 1 month of rent, right? And this is the residential context. In the commercial context, there's no limitation on how much security deposit you have, right? So if you're renting out a restaurant to someone and unfortunately they're out of business, you may have up to 4 months or 6 months of rent. So you can pull that money out every single month. Same thing in the residential context. At the very least, April rent hopefully is going to be covered, right, by the security deposit. In terms of last month's rent, you will have to get permission from the tenant to actually apply last month's rent to any arrearage that's owed. But again, remember, if you apply any last month's rent or security deposit to like April rent or May rent, then you really have no safety net either. Because security deposits meant to not only cover monies that are due, but potential damage to a property.
If you do apply that last month's and security to months that have been missed due to this COVID shutdown, would you say that if they continue to not pay, just be ready with the paperwork to file an eviction right away? Because again, some of this shakeout would tenants will not be in a good position at the end of this, and that will put landlords in a bad position. And I'm not sure why landlords think, or tenants think landlords have all the money in the world and not realize that landlords have bills as well. But they don't want to pay, and they may not have the ability to pay. But for the landlord to protect themselves, should they just be geared up to evict as soon as possible? Or do you think the courtrooms are going to be overwhelmed? And then like, how do you position yourself when things become normal again? Do you think things are going to be overwhelmed?
No, that's actually a great question. So what I would do is avail yourself of the remedies you do have in terms of sending out notice to quit, notice to vacate, and notice of termination, right? Because as you know, in Pennsylvania, if you don't pay rent or the tenant doesn't pay rent, unless these notices are waived in the lease, which sometimes they are, but if they're not, under the Landlord Tenant Act of 1951, you have to give 10 days notice to quit and to vacate from the premises. So if someone's not paying April 1st and there's a cooling off period, say a grace period of 5 days, after the 5 days, I would immediately send a notice to quit, a notice to vacate, and a notice of termination. Now, can you actually file anything against the tenant? No, but at least you're preserving your rights. The only thing I would say as to that is you just want to make sure that that's not going to prevent you from actually getting some type of mortgage forbearance. Remember, the forbearance programs that are out there, that the government's putting out there is on condition that you don't evict your tenant. So even sending out potentially a notice to quit, you may then have created a situation where you're not going to be eligible for those mortgage forbearance programs. But you can think ahead and file, at least prepare paperwork, send it out to the tenant, and giving them notice that you intend to exercise your rights.
There's a lot of fear in the air because April 1st hasn't come yet. This whole thing, believe it or not, has only been 2 weeks long, if that, right? We've only been shut down for a very short amount of time, but it has seemed like forever. So April 1st is going to shake out a whole lot of fear, right? Because right now we just don't know. That uncertainty, I think, is what's scaring people. In terms of other ways to prepare, so there might be some relief programs that are available from the government. There's that $1,200 stimulus check, which isn't very much, right? But it's something, I guess. In terms of cash flow, again, would you recommend people taking out loans or lines of credit if available right now?
Yeah, I mean, I always tell clients, have a line of credit, right? There's no obligation to actually take off of it. So most of my clients do have available lines of credit. Those lines of credit are usually second mortgages on their investment properties. So I see no reason as to why they shouldn't do that. Now, will it be available? That's the other question, because a lot of times the lines of credit, which are second mortgages against property, there has to be a certain loan to value ratio, right? So last time in the mortgage meltdown in 2008, like the loan to value ratio before 2008 for a lot of lines of credit were like 90% loan to value. And then they got to 80 and then 75% and even, greater loan to value because the bank wants to be secure. So unfortunately, I believe that the market's going to take a hit. So what you could have, what you can buy something for today is probably 20, maybe, and again, I'm not a realtor by any means, but it's going to be, 10, 20%, less than what it would have cost like maybe 2 weeks ago, right? That same property.
To keep people safe, here's the real estate investor side of me. Would you say that it's smart to analyze the properties with a 20% discount off of the ARV that is currently where it's currently at right now? So if a property's ARV was $100,000, then you're looking at it as $80,000 and then run your numbers accordingly to that.
Exactly. I mean, in a sad way, this is an opportunity for people who are very liquid to actually take advantage of this market and to be able to buy properties at a discount. I mean, the market's going to go up, right? Hopefully this is just a little hiccup, that's a few months and, maybe it'll take a couple years to get back to where we are. But the good thing about Philadelphia, the market never gets too high and never gets too low, right? So the good thing is, in a situation like this, hopefully, based on the national trend, we're not going to be New York City. We're not going to be Miami. We're not going to be LA, right? Those markets may take a significant hit. Philadelphia may take like a half a step hit, right, relatively. But it's still an opportunity for a wise investor to take advantage of getting some properties on the cheap.
A lot of times we've just been talking about doom and gloom, and that's all over the news because it sells, right? But I wanted to real quick discuss some of the winners that you've noticed and that I foresee going to be winners. But obviously, like supermarkets, they're winners. Zoom, which we're on now, winners. Social media, definitely. Things like Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime. Amazon itself is a winner in this. I also see things like weapons. Weapons have been, like all the gun stores, completely sold out. So that was a win. I can imagine that people who provide doomsday prepper equipment, so things like, who knows, like dry food, like dehydrators, bunkers, like that's a different type of real estate, but maybe even people who sell bunkers, solar power equipment, things like that, like they're going to be winners. Providers of video content, either educational or entertainment. So if you're creating new content that's online, insurance providers. So people are doubling down on life insurance and property and auto and health, making sure that everything is in place. Whereas before, maybe they didn't have it. So now they're thinking, okay, I'm gonna double down on that. Lenders. I believe that lending is going to be an interesting twist because with a loan versus say rent, with a loan, the lender could re-amortize your loan. The lender could put your missed payments on the back end. And so eventually you as the borrower are going to pay it, right? So I think lending is going to be they're going to have a bright future because they're going to reset their amortization schedule. And so it's going to be mostly interest again, even though they were maybe further along the line. People's credits are going to take a hit. Would you agree? Do you think people's credits going to take a hit, and then credit repair companies are going to be coming out of the woodwork?
Well, so it really depends. It depends on how forward thinking someone is. Because I'm talking to a lot of my clients are reaching out to their creditors, right? And trying to make deals, right? And again, as we talked about it, some of these forbearance programs, your credit won't take a hit. So then you actually have to make, that's a smart decision to potentially forbear from making payments, keep yourself liquid where your credit doesn't take a hit, right? So there are some people whose credit's going to take a hit because again, you're going to see a lot of people put their head in the sand. That's what happens a lot with people
Yeah.
when they're overwhelmed, and those people are going to have a difficult situation with their credit. But you know who are also winners are people who are more agile, right? So think about it. Title insurance companies, right? Title insurance companies tend to be very local, right? Because they have to attend the closings, right? Well, now Pennsylvania has temporarily allowed for mobile notaries, right? So if you can execute documents via mobile notary, all of a sudden, someone who's situated in Philadelphia as a title insurance company can now do closings all across the state. So people are agile like that. Maybe like, again, virtual showings, right? Again, you may be able to, you don't have to physically be there anymore, right? People don't want you in your house, right? In their house, right? Because of COVID-19. So there are going to be people who are going to be more efficient because all of a sudden they could do like 10 closings in like, 2 hours because they can go from 15-minute intervals and introduce a property and deal with people. Like the Zoom is really making it so that it's going to change the real estate industry from a commercial standpoint, right? So businesses are actually going to probably save some money realizing, hey, we're just as efficient in a lot of ways online. To have this video aspect to it, it's just as a personal touch as someone being in the office or the cubicle next door in some ways. So people are actually going to be more efficient too, right? Think about it. Maybe people will live less in the city, right? Because people always move to urban areas because that's where the jobs are, right? Because they don't want to do the commute of an hour. But now, if you can go sit in your house and you can do basically what you did in a physical workplace, maybe people will start rethinking about urban areas, and which will help some areas in the country develop. It could hurt others. So it's really going to be a shift in the marketplace and the way we think of life as we know it.
Right. So do you think it's the rise of the suburbs again? So everybody moving back out to the suburbs because their job is remote, and so they don't have to drive at all. They don't have to live in the city to be close to work.
It could be, again, it's just gonna. There's a lot of unknown factors here, but it's definitely changing the way we're thinking about things. Like look at Amazon, right? Amazon has taken a huge chunk out of the brick and mortar of our retail industry, right? So if like my office is in downtown Philly, if you go on Walnut Street, there was a trend a couple years ago. You saw, what's it called, Under Armour and a number of other big retailers move on Walnut Street, right? It was just too expensive Walnut Street. They don't need to have a presence other than to show off, right? Like, with Amazon and other retailers, they're just as efficient in, having sales online. So, and this may unfortunately hurt retail in that brick and mortar retail even more. I mean, the one thing you can't replace are restaurants, but for everything else, it's going to be, it's definitely going to be a wake up call to a lot of commercial landlords in town, where for especially the national brands may think about not having as much brick and mortar.
Right. Well, and actually, my thoughts around the restaurants. So a lot of these restaurants won't come out the other end successful or at like around anymore. They'll just go away because their cash flow might have just completely died to the point where if they were rocky before, they're done now. But a pivot that I can see restaurants going to is where they become ghost kitchens, where they are producing food for other brands. So let's say you call your favorite restaurant for takeout and delivery, and I'm guessing a lot of people who have never used something like Grubhub use Grubhub for the first time and had their food delivered. So in the future, what's going to happen is there are going to be restaurant brands And that's all they really are. They're just a brand. And then they say, here's our menu. And then they're going to have these kitchens all around the city producing food for them. And then so some delivery person is going to pick up, the food's going to be in that box for that restaurant and brought to you. So from sit-in dinner to ghost kitchen.
Yeah, I still think you're not going to lose the feel of the restaurants, the brick and mortar restaurants, because it's an experience. I know people that go to restaurants because of the experience, the socialization aspect of it. It's different than us talking, right? It would be, I think it's a more human feel. And again, you want to have something that tastes good, right? Not everyone's a great chef, right? So I still think that you're still going to see restaurants, especially Philadelphia. I mean, for a city of its size, has so many different restaurants, and one of the reasons why we have so many amazing chefs is, relatively to like New York or Miami or LA, we're still a lot cheaper rent wise. And that goes to like, business relief, right? That's one of the things that we're working on. There's a small business relief fund that the Philadelphia Department of Commerce has, as well in collaboration with PIDC. And you'll see in the federal legislation, there's a lot of availability for SBA loans, small business administration loans, which will help some businesses. So like that's something that you and a lot of your followers should look into. With respect to the federal legislation, there's a forgivable aspect to those loans. So if you use that money to keep payroll, you may not have to pay that money back. I mean, the legislation is all new. We're still learning it, but that's something to look at. And in terms of the small business relief for the city, they just, they have $9.25 million available in terms of grants and zero interest loans. So if you have a business in the city of Philadelphia that has made up to $500,000 a year up until recently, you could get a grant of up to $5,000. If you have a business that made $500,000 to $3 million, you can get a grant of up to $25,000. And if you have a business that made between $3 million and $5 million in the past year, you can get an interest-free loan of up to $100,000. So again, the savvy business owner and individual should look at those because again, we hear about, the $600 per person, the $1,200 per person, but there's a lot more money out there, especially for the small business owners.
So would the small business between $0 and $500,000 of revenue, right? So that encompasses a lot of small businesses. Would that include real estate investors who purchase properties in an LLC? Does that LLC qualify as that small business and is eligible for that 0% loan or grant?
Yes, you just have to show that you had a negative impact due to COVID-19. But yes, it's an online form. We've been working with clients all week on submitting that form. So, I remember when like 10 years ago, I bought my house that I'm in today. Philadelphia has a program called Philly Home Buy Now, right? So the city, and I think it's still around, the city would give up to a $5,000 grant to home buyers, not first-time home buyers, just a home buyer, so long as their employer matched it with a $5,000 forgivable loan. Well, I'm Alan Nachumson of Nachumson PC, right? So my company was more than happy to give the $5,000 forgivable loan. By the way, we give it to all of our employees. Like all of our employees are eligible. That's just a benefit of our company. But we were able to leverage that $5,000 forgivable loan to get $5,000 from the city. So again, just like, that situation, smart people will understand to use government in a positive way, right? So the government realizes there are a lot of small businesses out there that are suffering. We're not stealing the money. We're not taking advantage of the situation. We're trying to help. Like my business, we employ, individuals. If we need these small business loans, like this forgivable loans to maintain our workforce, we'll do it. And, I think we've clearly earned it given the amount of taxes we've paid over the years as well.
Right. Now, a lot of these LLCs that are set up by the real estate investors, they don't have any employees, right? They're just a holding company for the property. Would they be able to access any of these funds, grants, loans?
Well, so the small business relief fund from the city, one of the questions they do look, besides the impact that you have, which has to be a substantial impact, what they've stated has to be a decrease in business by 50% of what you were doing prior to this healthcare crisis. But the other impact that they look at is like how many employees do you actually have? Like what are you actually doing? Because again, if you're a pass through essentially, where you're Allen Knockomson LLC, and you own like one piece of property or two pieces of property, they're not looking to help those individuals. But we represent a lot of investors who own portfolios, right? And then they have management companies, and they do have employees, right? So again, it may not help the people who have one or two properties, but there are a lot of people there who have a portfolio of 4, 6, 10 properties where they have someone on staff who's their property manager. They have someone on staff who is like more of like a super. So that could help them. So.
Okay. Okay. And so for the people who do have just a pass-through entity with one or two properties within the entity, what relief do you know of is out there for them, if any, other than the forbearance of mortgage through the bank?
I think
Is that the only thing?
Yeah, I think that. I mean, as what we know right now, I think that would be a big thing for them, is the forbearance of those bank loans.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So, so you're a business owner yourself. You have your attorney practice. Now you're super busy with everything. How have you, maybe if you have, how have you changed the strategy within your business? Do you think how you used to run meetings, maybe like they used to be in person, now you're going to do more of them on Zoom? Do you think are you going to be working more on your business now that you have like the availability, now that you're home all the time? Like how has this impacted you as a small business or medium-sized business, however sized business you are?
Yeah, so it definitely affected my practice. So what we do, actually, I personally file more zoning appeals than any attorney in the city of Philadelphia. So zoning appeals are ones in which the zoning code allows a certain use for a property, and my clients are trying to use the property differently. So we represent a lot of mid-sized developers in town. We do development projects such as planned communities, apartment buildings, condo buildings. I mean, we do infill work as well. So most of my practice actually is presenting in front of communities, right? And then presenting in front of the zoning board of adjustment, right? So how my practice may change somewhat, because right now the zoning board is not meeting. They canceled their hearings through April 8th. We still have to meet with those communities, right? Whether or not eventually the zoning board's going to meet. It may change it where maybe these community groups are going to have like a Facebook Live page, right? And we do Zoom, and I make my presentations remotely, right? So that's one of the ways that we definitely changed. We've definitely, I never heard of Zoom before this. Like, I've heard of, I've used Skype and other things, but we've never really used Zoom before. I do think it's an opportunity to like refocus what's important and what's not. I'm a big believer in meeting with people. I think that personal face-to-face, and seeing someone, it's a little different than being online, but it's an opportunity to embrace new technologies. So our practice has changed because our focus is different. We're more crisis management than anything else. We're focusing more on keeping clients afloat than doing development projects in the city of Philadelphia, and to preserve development projects. Like, we're in communications with L&I to, there are people who are under contract to sell properties to buyers, right? I had a client in a 20-unit planned community in Brewerytown. He has 4 units that just got COs, and they're down to the punch list. But come 5 o'clock today, can he finish that punch list so then his buyers can then close? That, I don't know. We have to find the answer to that. Can we get a waiver? Does it fall within the city guidelines? So these are the things that we're focused on right now.
Right. Right. One of the questions that we have is, who might be advocating for landlords? So right now there's a tenant union who's telling its members to send a letter to their council person to demand free rent. So there's this like free rent movement occurring, and it's who's standing up for the landlords? Because again, the landlord is just a mom and pop organization usually, and they have bills too. They have the mortgage, they have the taxes, they have the insurance, they have to pay for the maintenance, the management, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm curious, do you know of any organizations that are fighting for the landlord's rights?
Well, I'm sure that we would talk about the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors. I would also think APCO, that deals with the landlord organizations. But there aren't a lot, right? Because there aren't a lot. We're especially where my practice is in the city of Philadelphia. Over the past year, there have been so many new rules and regulations that have really hurt landlords' ability to collect rent. As you know, every single rental arrangement on in the residential context requires that the landlord have a housing inspection license, requires that the landlord at the time of the inception of the lease tenancy has a certificate of rental suitability, and at the time of the inception of within 60 days from the inception of the lease term, that the landlord give the tenant the certificate of rental suitability and the Partners for Good Housing Handbook. And over the past year, the courts have stated that if you don't have the housing inspection license at the time you go to court, or you don't show proof that you gave the certificate of rental suitability or the Partners for Good Housing Handbook, not only can you not collect the rent at that time, you cannot even get possession of the property. So even if someone's not paying and they're not a good person, the courts have, and the court announces that at the hearings, before the hearing starts. If the landlord does not have a housing inspection license, and they don't show you proof that they gave you a certificate of rental suitability and a Partners for Good Housing Handbook, they cannot collect rent from you for that time period, and they cannot get possession. So it's actually emboldened a lot of tenants. Like, and again, there's many different other new rules and regulations. There are now tenant advocates in the courts. Well, the landlords don't have advocates in the courts that are free. So again, there are bad landlords out there. Don't get me wrong, right? But people, a lot of times, who don't pay their rent have no excuse. They just don't want to pay their rent, right? So for bad landlords, they should be punished. But bad tenants should be punished too, right?
Right. So with a bad tenant, if a landlord stays on top of his game, they have the rental suitability, they have the rental license, they give them the handbook, they do everything that they're supposed to do, and then they are able to evict the tenant. With that eviction, that actually never comes off of the tenant's record, correct? Or correct me if I'm wrong.
It goes on their credit rating. Well, judgment for possession, probably not. But if there's a judgment for money, yes, it goes against their credit. And even if they never collect, like say, most times the landlord never collects that judgment, but it'll follow the tenant. So if they ever want to get financing for a car, they want to buy a house, eventually they're going to have to pay.
Good advice to tenants, which is, like, we all have bills to pay, and it's not fair that you guys don't pay rent. The typical landlord is a mom and pop organization. They are not a big government entity, corporation, anything like that. So if a tenant is evicted because the mom and pop landlord has to evict the tenant, then that's actually going to do way more harm to that tenant than the month rent that they were able to skip out on, or 2 months rent that they were going to skip out on. Like, tenants should think more long term.
That's right. Unfortunately, a lot of the tenants think short term. They tend to be younger. Some people, who are, especially in the beginning of their lives, are not as responsible as people who, as they get older, and they don't think about, oh, I want to eventually buy a house and get a mortgage, or I want to have a car, or they don't understand the implications of having a judgment against themselves. So
right, because that, like you were saying, that judgment follows them, and they have to get that judgment cleared off one way or another, whether you pay it or make an agreement or something, but that has to come off, whether now or 10 years from now when they're looking to buy a house.
That's right. And then in Pennsylvania, all judgments accrue interest at the rate of 6% per annum.
What are some of the skills that you think people should stack up on? What do you think people should learn in terms of becoming a better business owner as well as real estate investor?
Well, I think you should always be knowledgeable about what you want to do, right? So, one of the things that we created is a resource center for COVID-19. So if you go on our website, Nachumson, NOCHUMSON.com, we, again, it's easy to talk on these type of Zoom sessions, but is there any substance behind you, right? So I write a monthly real estate column for the legal newspaper, right? I've been writing it for 20 years. If you went on my website, you would literally see almost 150 articles. It's not always been a monthly. Sometimes it was every other month. But we write about the law because we want to know about the law. So whatever your industry is, whether it's real estate, business, finance, whatever it is, we're so busy. So now we're not. Like, brush up on what you know or what you want to know, right? So that's really important. The other thing is, it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? So, again, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk to you. But if you remember, like yesterday when we got introduced, it was through one of my longstanding clients, and it's because of we got introduced because of who I know and who you know, right? So make an opportunity to like meet with people through Zoom. This is great, right? So take an opportunity to meet with like several people a day, right? And figure out how you can help each other. The only way to know to see I don't believe in luck. I believe that you put yourself in a position enough times that you have opportunity, right? So put yourself in that position enough times, then you can quote unquote be lucky, right? So meet with people who you want to meet with and who you maybe had too little time because you were too busy at work and your personal life. Things have slowed down a little bit. This is an opportunity to refocus. So.
Right. So in terms of the things that I was talking about earlier, in terms of winners,
Mhm.
would you agree with me that maybe the kids are actually the winners in this situation because they have no idea what's going on in the economy or anything like that? So they're not affected. All they realize is that, oh, mommy and daddy are home a lot more and we get to play board games. And, my nephew learned how to ride a bike during this time. It's like, so this is a situation where it's like, this is what we work so hard for. So now here's the time to actually enjoy it. So, I mean, I guess I'm saying this more so not to get you to agree or not agree, but more so for everybody to just realize and just take a second to be grateful that we got this pause, this break, and that they should really enjoy it.
No, I agree. I mean, through my development work with clients, I work a lot of nights with community meetings. This is an opportunity to be at home more, to cook, to kind of spend more time together as a family. So it is. It's a little breath of fresh air for some people, and you should really embrace that.
I'm not sure how well versed you are in tax law, but would something like this work? Say you made a lot of donations to a hospital that's in need. I'm not sure. Maybe you had uh, personal protective equipment like the PPE stuff. Maybe you had masks. Maybe you had whatever you had, and then you donated those things to the hospital. Then you get a tax write-off for those items. So now it's kind of like income, but in reverse because you don't have to pay the taxes. Is that something that people should be taking a look at as well?
Well, just as a community, we should try to give back, especially if you have, right? So actually, our firm is donating 10% of all the income we earn during this government shutdown and stay-at-home order. So if you go on our website, you'll actually see the link that we have to PHL COVID-19 fund. That's a fund through the greater, I think, the United Way, as well as the Philadelphia Foundation. And and a lot of the business communities pulling their resources to help a lot of the nonprofits in town. So that's another thing. Go on our COVID-19 page where you will see that we're donating 10%, but we also have a button where people can donate directly too. Because there's a way, it really should be a way to give back, right? If you're lucky enough to have something, you should try to give back, especially during these times.
People, it's not the haves and have nots because I think everyone's being affected, but some have a little bit more. And the have nots, I believe they're going to be decimated because they were already paycheck to paycheck. And now they're not even that. So yeah, we can definitely help each other get through this because though the government's going to be giving out that $1,200, I don't know how far that stretches. So really that the help needs to come from one another. The other thing that I wanted to real quick discuss was with investors. Have you spoken to any investors who want out of this market right now, or where they're just like putting their hands up and like, I'm done?
Well, I have clients who are under agreement for certain projects. who may have difficulty closing for various reasons. They may have private investors who may be bailing out. The banks may not be satisfied with the appraisals. So there are opportunities, obviously, for people to kind of step into their shoes. I would probably say take a step back. If you own property, don't sell now. Never sell low, right? So unless you need the money, right? So there are some people who are going to need the money. Again, it's an opportunity for people who are smart before this crisis happened, who are more liquid, who can take advantage of opportunities. So
right. And what I was saying to some of my students was that for those, there's going to be a lot of people who want out, because this is a majority mom and pop run business. And for the people who want out, that's your in. That's your opportunity to get in. So there's always these ebbs and flows. Your prediction, is this going to be a fast or slow recovery?
I think it's going to take some time. I think it's going to take a year to get some type of grasp of the effects of what's going to happen, but it's going to take some time.
Okay. So how do people take advantage of this situation so that not only are they surviving, but they're thriving? How do they thrive through this?
All right, well, lessons learned, right? So for people who are a little bit maybe more frivolous with money, maybe they'll still have less of it in this way, but now maybe they'll be smarter about okay, do I really need that Frappuccino every day? Do I need that latte every day, right? Maybe you make coffee at home. Now we have no choice, right? I go out every day. I get at least one cup of coffee. It's like $4, $5, right? But now, in some ways, we're actually saving a lot of money. We're the type of people that are always eating out. We're the type of people that do X, Y, and Z. We're cooking now all the time. So we're actually saving a lot of money in that respect. Obviously, income is, less, but expenses are lower. So think about how you can improve oneself, both financially, maybe mentally, physically, right? This is an opportunity. You can work out. You don't need to go to that gym every single day. We run, all throughout the city. We do cross training. We have kettlebells. There are opportunities to do things that may not cost money.
Right. Okay. So that's a positive way to look at it, right? Yeah, your income took a hit, but so do your expenses. They're super low now.
That's right.
And maybe you keep this lifestyle going, this low expense lifestyle, because it's not so bad.
And you eat healthier too. Think about it. If you work eating from home versus eating out, you're eating healthier. So think about it that way too.
That's a good point. That is definitely a good point. So yeah, I think we covered a lot. How do people reach you? What's the best way for them to reach you if they want to hire you for your services? What's the best way?
Well, so first of all, my website is Nachumson, N as in Nancy, OCHUM as in Mary, SON as in Nancy.com. So Nachumson.com. You can go on our contact page at contact@nachumson.com is our email address. You can email me directly at alan.nachumson@nachumson.com. People can leave, if you go on my bio page, there's a phone number for me. If they want to leave a message, we have all of my voicemail messages go to my email, and someone will reach out to them directly.
Awesome. So, well, thank you for sharing this, right? You're doing people a huge service in terms of just getting through this whole thing, and also what to prepare for, because if you have this vision of what's going to happen in the future, you can better prepare for it and then definitely thrive through, right? It's not just about surviving, but actually making it out better than you were. So thank you for sharing all of your knowledge, and thank you for being available to anybody who needs your help. So I guess that's it.
All right, great. Have a great day.